All right, so tonight we have Dr. Kerri Hample. She is going to be talking about sensory profiles with your child and kind of exploring that avenue. So I'm going to turn it over, and Kerri, you can go ahead and do a little bit of a formal introduction of yourself if you'd like.
Sure. So I wanted to start off by thanking you for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure to share a little bit more information about sensory processing and how it helps or doesn't help our kids in some instances. And so tonight we are going to chat a little bit about sensory processing and what it looks like, what it is, what it isn't, kind of some things that get mixed up with it, all kinds of, it's definitely a buzzword. And so of course, when you have a buzzword, you certainly have, more than one interpretation of things. So let me start by just saying, I am Dr. Kerri Hample, but I go by Kerri. So you're all more than welcome to call me Kerri. I have been a practicing occupational therapist for the last 25 years. I've worked almost entirely in pediatrics, but I have done some work in adult work, predominantly in group homes and places like that. I've been coaching Special Olympics since I was 13. I have quite a few clients who used to be my athletes. So I've been working with the population since the time I was like 10, 11, 12 years old. And they have taught me so much. And so I am thrilled to share more information. Now you'll see a bunch of letters behind my name. Some of them are for occupational therapy. And then the last 6 or whatever they are, is for, I am an internationally certified health coach. And I will explain why those go together toward the end. It'll make sense as to why I'm a nationally or internationally certified health coach, in addition to being an OT. I am a full-time professor at Elizabethtown College, and I have the distinct pleasure of teaching an interdisciplinary autism certificate and being the director of the doctoral program there. So it's tons of fun. I get to do lots of research. I've done quite a bit of research on interoception. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. I'm going to promise to keep things as basic as I need to, or ramp up based on your questions. So I put together a PowerPoint kind of as a baseline, but if you have questions that are more advanced, or you have questions that are more basic, please, there are no silly questions. The only silly or stupid question is the one not asked. So please feel free to, I won't see your hand, but Lakin will, or put it in the chat bar, and I am more than happy to talk as we go. I prefer a pretty interactive group, so we'll go that way. So let's go without further ado. Let's kind of get going. So what we're going to talk about tonight. What is sensory processing? I thought we should start there because we all have different definitions of it. And then what does sensory processing, how does it impact your kiddo at home, in the school, in the community? What are you seeing, and what does that look like? And then how do we assess it? Like what does an occupational therapist do to actually assess sensory processing? And lastly, what can be done about it? Like, so if we're going to say that it's not working the way we want it to, then what are we going to do about it? And so figured we'd do that last. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to start at the top, and we're going to start with what is sensory processing. All right. So sensory processing is simple. It's just the process that organizes sensation from one's own body and the environment, thus making it possible to use the body effectively within your own environment. So right now, everyone sitting here is receiving sensory information from the environment around you. The lighting that's in front of you, it's either too blurry, maybe too bright, or maybe just right, but it's there, and your brain is interacting with it, whether we know it or not. Whatever you're sitting on, the chair that you're sitting in, it's giving your rear end a feedback mechanism to know that you're in the chair, you're not falling out of it, you're not, the chair is maybe comfortable, or maybe you chose one that's a little bit stiffer because you wanted to pay attention. So you yourself just demonstrated sensory processing, and I'm going to pick on some people just because it's more fun, right? So I see Lakin sitting like upright in an office chair, and so you're looking at her and she's responding to that chair, right? Like as if she was at a sofa, she might be laid back a little bit more. So that in and of itself is sensory processing. You are taking what's going on in the environment, you're making sense out of it in your brain, and you're responding to it. That's it. That's all it is. It's taking the sensory information, making meaning out of it, and then responding to it. So where kids with sensory processing disorder and or autism and or ADHD, it really kind of depends on how the kiddo got diagnosed. If there is sensory dysfunction, what you will see is that there's a gap somewhere in there. Either they don't get the signals, right? The signals aren't right, or they're getting too many, too few, or once they're coming in, the meaning isn't making sense. So for you and I, if that light is too bright, I'm just going to turn it off, right? The light's too bright, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm able to make sense out of that information and fix it. But someone who has sensory processing disorder knows the light is something's bothering them, but they don't know what, and they might not necessarily act on fixing it. That's the response. Okay, so either the information isn't coming in the way you and I normally perceive it, or it's getting mixed up in the meanings, or we're not responding to it. And if you're working with an occupational therapist and you do an assessment, they're going to tell you exactly where the breakdown is. It's either in the detection, it's in the meaning, or it's in the response. Now they have fancy names for all that. And honestly, it doesn't matter. One's called sensory modulation, one's called sensory awareness, and one's called sensory integration. But as a parent, you really don't have to be worried about it. Like it doesn't matter. All you need to know is that your kiddo or your adult or the person that you care and love with, does not get the same signals at the same frequency, make the same meaning out of it, and respond the way that everyone else does. Now, a little bit of a spoiler alert. Some of you are going to sit here and watch this tonight and you're going to go, I think I have it. I think I have sensory dysfunction. Well, here's the thing. We all do. There are certain things that bothers everybody. Like if you honk horns at me long enough, I'm going to snap, right? Or if you hand me a mushy avocado, I'm out of here. I am not eating it. There's no way. Right. So we all have different levels of things that we can tolerate. Some of us like, clothing that's tighter. Some of us like clothing that's looser. Some of us love getting our hair cut. Some of us hate getting our hair cut, so it's all across that spectrum. But if I have sensory processing disorder, I don't know how to move forward when I have had one of those things happen. Whereas if I have a neurotypical system, I know how to move forward, right? The light is bothering me. I can deal with it. I can move on. The avocado is gross. I can choose not to eat it, and it doesn't interrupt me for the rest of the day. It doesn't throw an adrenaline response into me that makes me so out of whack that I can't get through the rest of my day, right? Every time one of our kids goes into one of these, like what we'll call a sensory meltdown, it's like an over responsivity to sensory. Every time that happens, adrenaline gets shot through their system, and it takes 45 minutes to undo every minute of adrenaline. So when your kiddo goes into one of those meltdowns or whatever you want to call it, we all have different names for it, but when they get over responsive, when it's too much and the adrenaline goes flying, it takes 45 minutes for every 1 minute to bring them back to a place of homeostasis. And no, it doesn't make sense. It does not make sense that, like, for me, a tiger chasing me would put that amount of adrenaline in my system, right? And for some of these kids, it's a strawberry. It's the fact that you didn't hug them when they wanted hugged. It's the fact that you're getting their hair cut. It's something like the shirt isn't right or the socks aren't lined up perfectly. And to you and I, in a neurotypical mind, we're like, that's insane. We have to come to this at a place with empathy where we understand that their signals they're not right. And they're not making the right meaning out of it to move forward. And that's when we have what we call sensory processing disorder. It's when the brain has trouble receiving and responding to the information in an appropriate way. That's all it is. It can be with kids with autism. It can be kids with intellectual disabilities. It can be kids with ADHD. It can be kids with OCD, depression. It can happen to people who've experienced trauma. It can happen to eating disorders. There's really no rhyme or ration. It doesn't escape people, but almost 85% of kids with autism do have sensory processing disorder. So it's kind of like they go together, but they're married, but not really. They're kind of funny stepchildren of each other.
I have a quick question, actually.
Please, yes.
Actually, you just brought up the part I was talking about proprioception and the senses. So you just answered my question for me. Yep,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, so let's talk about that. So you and I, before I became an OT, I grew up in a world where if someone asked you how many senses are there, you were really quick to respond. You said 5, right? And no one questioned it. No one doubted you. And it was your vision, touch, taste, olfactory, and auditory. And it was like, yeah, there was no debate. Well, there actually is debate. There are 3 more that occupational therapists are particularly focused on, and those are internal sensations, and those are proprioception, vestibular, and interoception. So I'm going to talk more about those, but it's really important that you understand that all 8 are there, and all 8 have a really important role in how we make meaning out of our world so that we can respond appropriately with our behavior. So the vision information that's coming into my system is every bit as important as the proprioceptive, as the touch, as the taste. They're all equal. So there's no like one sensory and one sensation that's more important than the other one. They are all equal. And when we have a kiddo who has sensory processing disorder, there is no rhyme or reason to which one of these senses is affected. Okay, so you can have a kiddo that it's just vision. They're just visually distracted. If you take that kiddo and you just move them to the front of the classroom so there's not all the hanging mobiles and all the other stuff in between them and the teacher, they'll pay attention and they're fine. But then there's the kid who it's the vision, the touch, the taste, all of it. And it's like a bombardment, right? So that just putting a kid at the front of the room, you're not going to solve the problem. So it takes a much bigger approach. But what I want to make sure everyone understands is that all 8 are equally important. And these five external ones, they're the obvious ones. They're the ones that are easy, frankly, to modify the environment. And you might not even need an OT to be able to handle a lot of those, right? But the 3 at the bottom, we're going to talk more about, because those are the ones that an OT is going to cue into. And they're the ones that are really going to help you understand your child more so, an adult, even yourself as an adult for sure.
So in your field, do you typically see one sense that kind of overtakes more of that than the other senses? Or is it pretty even across the board?
So it is even across the board. I tend to have more referrals for kids because I have the nutrition piece. I tend to have more referrals for kids who are really picky eaters or kids who have trouble in the bathroom. So because I tend to attract kids that are picky eaters or have trouble in the bathroom, I tend to see more interoception and more taste, touch kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean that if you lined 12 therapists up, I don't think you would see them say like, well, it's always tactile, or it's always touch, or it's always olfactory. It's not. I've had kids that I worked with a little girl. She was classic. And these were twins. So this will kind of give you the idea of like understanding how all this sensory stuff kind of comes together. These two little guys were twins. They were 3. And the girl was a sensory avoider. Like she absolutely hated a lot of stuff. Her mom was a nail technician and did nails in the house. And she would, from the minute you wouldn't even get too close to their house, and she'd start the gagging me. And it's the smell of nails, or even if you baked brownies, anything, hair, like shampoo. She used to be like, everything gagged her, and she would legitimately throw up. Like, so you could put baked brownies, and most people in here probably think, brownies, it smells good. But she would actually throw up if you baked brownies because it would be that noxious for her. It was just too much. Whereas her brother was the ultimate seeker, right? Like he would make noise for the sake of making noise because he liked noise. He would make sure things smelled. He would take things that were take something that was like, this and just go like this so he could watch it. Like he would kind of do all this. He was do a lot of visual stimulation. He couldn't get enough sensory input to save his soul, and she had too much. So can you imagine this poor mom, right? This mom is like, I'm stuck with them, and one wants one and one wants the other. And so if you tried to please the one, it would make the other mad. And so what really worked for both, we had to find one that was going to work for both of them. And proprioception, we'll talk more about it, is that deep pressure. It's the one that like the big, the real squeezers. And so that did work for both of them. It would give him enough input and it would help her calm down to whatever the input was. And so we did a ton of like wrestling and taking the cushions off the sofa and making like tacos out of it. When I say a human taco, so the kiddo climbs on the sofa and then mom pretends to put like cheese on top and you're pushing into the kiddo, and you really can't push too hard. Like these kiddos crave that stuff. Or they would put him in the bathtub because the bathtub has tons of great proprioception in there. So with all that said, are there questions before I move forward? Because I'm sure I just gave you a lot there.
Yes, actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
I've noticed with my son that he has both he seeks a lot of sensory, but then he's also overwhelmed with a lot of other types of sensory. Is that pretty typical?
Is it the same sense or is it two different senses?
It's normally two different senses. So like he loves feeling tugged on, he loves spinning, jumping, but
that's proprioception.
Certain sounds like he doesn't like, he's plugging his ears. If there's like a lot of people in the room, he gets very sensitive with that. So he can get overwhelmed really easily, but at the same time, he's constantly seeking like all different kinds of sensory movement, and it tends to be not only like deep pressure, but like tugging, like anything of that nature.
Tugging is deep pressure.
Yeah, and even tickling. He gets obsessed with us chasing him and tickling him.
So a lot of kids have what we call like a tight window, right? It's like this very tight window of like when it's good. They go from it being like not enough to too much, and it's like this very short window. So but any kid that you have that in, proprioception, stimulating proprioception is going to be your ticket to calming them down. And I'll explain why we'll move on, but it's proprioception. So the way you do proprioception is to give them all the deep pressure you can think of, right? So we talk a lot about like hugging, not light touch hug, like hug, hard hug. And you'll hear people talk about things like brushing, joint compressions, anything that would stimulate deep pressure. Bathtub is amazing. Bathtubs and showers.
With baths.
Because it's nice, hard, like pressure. Going swimming, hot tub, Play-Doh, anything where you're really working your muscles. These are the kids where I'll often tell the teacher, hey, I want you to make him take everything to the library. He loads a wagon full of books that's heavy and he has to take them with him to the library. So he's like carting books around. It's like a way, or load their backpack, weight it down, like put tons of weight in their backpacks and have them do it a couple times a day. It's regulating. That proprioception is actually regulating. And your major proprioceptors are in the palms of your hand, they're in the balls of your feet, and then they're in your jaw and your face. So that's why, how many people here are willing to admit that when they have to like focus on something, they would prefer to chew gum, right? Like a lot of people would say, I like chew gum, right? And so like that is a sensory modulation tactic. You're giving yourself deep pressure and that's helping your brain regulate so that you can do what it is you need to do. Now, you and I are not having a meltdown to get the gum, right? Like you and I are just like, oh, I think I'll chew a piece of gum. We don't even really think about it. We just do it. That's where our kids, they don't know to do that. But once you offer it, or you give them a water bottle that's kind of hard to suck through, you give them thick liquids that you have to work. Think work. When you think proprioception, you want to think work, making your muscles work. And it's regulating. You and I know if we go out and we, slam a hammer for a while for something, we come in and we're like, you're settled. You're pretty good. It's why kids need recess, frankly. So let me talk a little bit about what we kind of hit this, but what you're going to have is hyper-responsivity, hypo-responsivity, or a mixed result. And that's happening in all kids, and it can happen across the span. So you really want an occupational therapist to take a really good look at your kiddo and tell you what is happening with yours, because it's really there's no two kids that are ever the same. I have yet to work 30 years. I haven't met two kids that look the same. But if I see hyper responsivity, like hyper responsive to vision, right, would be like the kid who can't tolerate the bright light, the kid that will tell you like that fluorescent lights flicker, the kid that tells you that like they need a film over top of something they're reading because the words are too busy. Now, some kids are nonverbal, right? So how do you know that like they're having that response? Well, it's when they look away from something that you and I wouldn't perceive to be too bright, or they need sunglasses when they go outside. They need a hat to keep the light from kind of coming in. So that would be a hyper response to vision. A hypo response to vision might be they don't even notice you entered the room. They don't notice differences in things, you know, like you'll move something and they'll never notice it. Or they have a really hard time picking out what's important from their visual environment. These are the kids that like, if you hand them a Where's Waldo book, they would not be able to, they don't even care why Waldo's involved. So they're not going to find Waldo because they're just like, that's not important. So a lot of times kids who are hypo, they'll almost act like they are not present, or just they take more sensory to wake them up, to get them to do what you want them to do. The mixed responsivity is when you have one sense that you're getting a hyper response and one sense that you're getting a hypo. That's really common. It's really common. It's very rare for me to run into kids where they say, yep, total hyper. I'm like, really? There's nothing that's hypo? I mean, it's just very rare for you to have a kid that's one way all the way. They usually will, if they're super auditory defensive, then they usually like a lot of vision. Or if they're super visual defensors, then they like music and they like sound and something like that. So there's really no rhyme or reason to it. I wish there was, but there isn't. They kind of adapt to how it is their system works. And so they'll seek out environments that work for them. A lot of this you will notice as a parent that these kids feel out of control a lot. They can't control the sensory environment around them. So they'll control you, right? Or they'll control the adult in the room because they can't control the sensory piece. And so what they'll do is they kind of like a lot of them create rules and things like that. That's like, I'm only eating, like, see what, I had a kiddo only eat shredded wheat if you stand it up. And it was like, that's like crazy. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? To you, like, what? That doesn't make any sense. But for him, it was like, I can control the shredded wheat and how you stand it. And if you stand it that way, I'll eat it. And it won't, you know, that way it's not visually overwhelming to me. It's like, I can handle the tactile piece because you've dealt with the visual piece. And so they'll pick up these rules. And a lot of times we kind of think that doesn't make any sense, but for them, it's exerting control so that they can behave, so that they can respond the way that they need to, because they know they need to eat. They know that they need to eat whatever it is you gave them. And they're trying to please you, but it's too much. And so they're going to create some rules, right? Like you have kids who say, well, I'll only eat Tyson chicken nuggets, no other brand. And they have to be done in the toaster oven, right? Because that's the way this kiddo is basically telling his world that, like, if they're that way, it's not going to be that bad of an assault. I can handle the assault if it's that way. But if you give them to me kind of mushy, or you give me a different brand that tastes a little different, I don't know if I can handle that. So I'm not going to try it. And they're not going to verbalize all that. Like, these kids aren't going to verbalize that. They're just going to stop doing things. And just understand, it's not a defiance. It's not a your kid choosing to be difficult today. It is really your kid trying to cope with the amount of sensory information that is coming into their world. And it's a lot. All right. So you'll also hear people talk about responses in terms of seekers and then avoiders, right? So oftentimes when you get a sensory profile back from an occupational therapist, it'll have two categories on it. It'll say your child seeks this kind of information and your child avoids this kind of information. And that's great information for you to be able to figure out how to set up your household, set up, your car ride. Like, if your kiddo is a sensory seeker, right? Like, if they're seeking tactile touch, that's the kiddo that you want to create the bucket of take a tackle box and put a whole bunch of different the cotton balls and like a couple pebbles, like things that all feel different. Put them in there, put them in the car. I mean, hopefully they don't throw them at you. I know there's probably gonna be a kid that's gonna throw it, but like a couple, if your kid's a thrower, only pick a couple, right? But do a couple things like that. If they're sensory seekers, you have to give them ways to meet their need. I want you to think of it like a car, right? You have to put gas in a car in order for it to run. If you put the wrong gas in, your car is not going anywhere. Tank might be full, but it's not going anywhere. In a kid who has sensory processing disorder, you often have to think about it like a car. You have to fill their sensory bucket with the right information if you want them to respond appropriately. They don't have a way to do it. And so by giving them more, you're going to get it. Yeah. The avoiders, you know, you got to let them have some control, because you're not going to win that battle. I have a kiddo who is an avoider. He's 17 now. And when growing up, like for him, I will never forget it. It was the socks. Somebody on here is probably gonna start laughing because you probably have a kiddo that's done this with you. But for him, it was the sock, the way it lines up on his toes, the line on this, and I never even thought about lines on socks, right? But it never bothered me. I don't know. So here he is with his like line on his sock. Honest to Pete, from the day he was 2 till the day he was 6, he would take his shoe and throw it at my head every single morning, no matter what I did. Every single morning. And finally, he was about 5.5. I looked at him and I went, buddy, please don't throw the shoe. Like, I can't take the shoe anymore. Like, what is up with the shoe? And he finally looked at me and he went, it's not the shoe. And I was like, it's not the shoe. He's like, no, it's the sock, Mom. Fix the sock. And I was like, oh, okay. So from that day on, we fixed the sock and things are better. Now, is it always that simple? Oh my gosh, no. Do I wish it was? Yes. You wouldn't need OT if it was that simple, right? But there are things that as they get older and as you're able to have more dialogue, you can start to have that conversation. If they're nonverbal and not having that dialogue, you just have to watch. You have to watch a whole lot closer, and you have to understand that that kiddo is doing the absolute best they can in the moment that you're interacting. I don't believe that kids wake up and choose to be difficult or choose to be hard or choose to have the sensory world not work for them. Like, I truly believe that all kids are trying to do their absolute best, and it's up to us to understand more and better. It's hard, but that's our job. Okay, so the external senses are much more obvious, much more easy to intervene with. So like noises, they're not going to notice something, or they're going to overreact. They're going to be the kid that's going to come home with their spelling list, and it's like, where did these words come from? Because these aren't even the right words, because they couldn't pick out what the teacher was actually talking about. They just wrote down whatever else they were hearing from people in the classroom and all kinds of stuff like that. So auditory attention is a thing, right? It's hard to pay attention to exactly what you're supposed to pay attention to. Everyone on this call right now is paying attention to my voice, right? But if there was to be a competing voice all of a sudden, you wouldn't know which one to pay attention to. If you had sensory processing disorder, you would try to pay attention to both of them. And then you would give up and you would basically pay attention to the wrong one. That's what happens. Vision, it's the kids who don't notice. They can't attend to the visual piece. The taste, lots of picky eating. If you've got a kiddo that eats like 5 foods or less, you are not alone. That is my full-time practice. I deal with like I have kids that are the white food diet kids that eat nothing but white, it's crackers, chicken nuggets, pizza, and an occasional piece of cheese, right? I've even seen it to be so narrowed down to where I have kids that literally eat nothing but marshmallows and root beer for days on end. Now we all know that that's not enough to sustain brain function, right? Like that's just not. So, but that's how taste will manifest, or it'll manifest in a way of a kid who wants to put hot sauce on everything, a kiddo who wants to like put like just crazy amounts of salt or just really strong flavors. It's the kid who wants the Sour Patch, the double, what are they called? The Sour Patch Kids that have been literally like rolled in salt twice or something. They're like the super one, the super pucker uppers. Those are the kids that they can't get enough of those. And then of course, olfactory is like ordinary for you and me, but noxious to them. Like I live in Lancaster County. I live right off of an Amish farm. So when I walk out, so there's some days there's like, whoa, that is disgusting. but I can still live my life. Like some of these kids, they can't, like they just, it's too much. And touch, we'd often see in like clothing and haircuts. You know, I often work with kids that only wear Under Armour type clothing, or they'll only wear t-shirts if they're bigger, the athletic shorts, like you say the word jeans and they want to like absolutely run, like they have nothing to do with jeans, right? Or they want nothing to do with like a collared shirt, like a polo shirt. It's like, no way. You know, the girls don't want to wear frilly anything because it feels weird. So those are the kind of the ways that we see it manifest. And some of it is just a little, and it's not a big deal. But sometimes it's like you won't get dressed and leave your house. Okay, now it's a big deal. Now we have to do something about it. We do need an OT to get involved. If your kiddo won't wear shoes, we have to deal with that. If your kiddo is walking around in a diaper in the winter, and I have kids that are doing that, that definitely is an occupational therapy referral, 100% for sure. How about I'll pause and answer any questions that are coming as we go here.
I, of course, have more questions.
Please.
So as you can see, Max is a very high sensory seeker, pressing, whatever. We've done like squeezies in the past. So just to kind of, you know, all around his head. And then, so that seems to work usually. But one of the main things he always does is he'll chin pushes. So like task avoidance and, you know, I don't want to do what you're telling me to, or there's too many demands placed on me. He does this to the point where you can hear it. And, you know, I know there's going to be teeth and jaw issues. How to correct that to extinguish that behavior?
Okay, so first of all, understand that this is really hard. And I'm not, like, it's going to sound like I'm coming at you. I'm not. But
No, please come at me.
It's going to feel this way a little bit.
No, that's okay.
Those are two different approaches. Okay, so a behavioral approach is one where I believe that I can reward or punish, for lack of a better word, my way out of whatever it is that you're doing. Sensory processing is a totally opposite theory and says you can't do I cannot do what someone's asking me to do without the sensory information I need. So I need to give myself extra chin. That's what he's using, but it could be, you know, push-ups, it could be whatever. I need to give myself extra because I don't know how to do what she's asking me to do, or I'm not capable right now, or I don't want to. And I want you to think about it. Like if someone asks you to do something that you don't want to do, like the dishes, you don't want to do the dishes. Do you want to do the dishes right now?
Mm-hmm.
So like if I said, Kelly, right now, go do the dishes, what would you do?
Make a face or like,
yeah, you'd make a face, you'd throw a little hissy fit, you'd like, but you'd eventually go do it. Okay.
Right.
He can't.
Okay.
Because he's not available right now. He doesn't have the sensory information he needs in order to do it. He's not being belligerent. He's not being difficult. He's just not ready. So the sensory information that you're going to give him is going to help him get ready. Now, does that mean he's going to go do it? No, I'm not in control of what kids do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only in control of what I offer and what I enable, but I'm not in control. I mean, if he decides to hit me upside the head, like he hit me upside the head, like that's on me. I probably did something to deserve it. Like, who knows? But, or maybe I didn't. I don't know. But I'll never know that. I don't have control over what his response, because remember, he doesn't have control. If you go back to the very beginning, he doesn't have the ability to control his response. So how can I expect him to? So if he's doing a lot of this and it's hurting his jaw, we need to replace this with something that's safer. So that's the way I always view it. Is it chewing gum? Is it eating foods that have more of a, like, give him more of a jaw response? Is it doing push-ups? Is it pushing the wall? Is it, I mean, there's a million different things you can try. It's easy. Google it, you know, just Google proprioceptive activities and you'll get hundreds of them. And then you can try a couple and see which ones work for him. If you're saying that the head squeezes work, I don't know if anyone's ever talked to you about like a pressure vest or a proprioceptive vest or like a shirt that goes underneath his main layer of clothes.
He's
But when you
tried
put-
that in the past and it just didn't, like we even tried like a helmet, like a hat, and he doesn't even like anything on his head.
No, he's not going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that just didn't work for him
Okay.
but I also
Well,
know that
it
those
may,
are
it
very
may
effective.
work now. They get
Mhm.
older, remember? So
Okay.
things definitely change, right? But I would look for like ways to give him more proprioceptive input.
Okay. Perfect.
And then when he does this, like when he does this, whatever this is, I would at that moment, I would try to occupy his hands with something else.
Okay.
Whether that be, you know, squeeze balls, stress balls, you know, whatever it is, I'd be like, hey buddy, let's do this instead. And I wouldn't say no chin or no, because if you think about it, is anybody here, it's winter, anybody on a diet? Somebody's probably on a diet, right? If I say to you, okay, Lakin, if I say to you, what's your favorite food, Lakin? Favorite one?
Pizza.
Okay, so I said to you, from now until you've lost the 10 pounds or whatever it is you want to lose, you can't have pizza. No pizza. You didn't even want pizza, but now you want pizza, right? Like, because I said, no, you can't have pizza. So as soon as I say no chin, no, like you're drawing attention to what it is. You have to understand since we talk about sensory diets, it's sensory cravings too. So like if I crave this and you tell me I can't have this, and then I'm like, right? I want it even more. So we're better off if we try to replace it. We're better off if we offer other things for them to do to get that same kind of, hey buddy, let's do 10 jumping jacks instead of, you know, hey buddy, let's do 10 jumping jacks. Hey bud, let's go push the wall. Like if you can catch that a couple times, you'll start to change what his brain does when he's overwhelmed. That's just his natural response to being overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. I've been trying to decipher this for like the past 10 years, and you've explained it better in the last 5 minutes than I've ever heard. So thank you. That all makes so much sense.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But it's been a long, I do a lot of work in the Amish community. So I've had to explain things on a very basic level many times. And so I think that sort of helped with my ability to put it into words, but you really need to understand. I know that the people in the autism community right now are using a lot of ABA. I am not anti-ABA. I want to be very clear about that because there's somebody in this audience that's going, oh my God, she's anti-ABA. We're in trouble. I am not anti-ABA, but I am highly aware that you can't sticker me or behavioralize your way through getting me to do something that I'm not capable of doing. If you say to me, Kerri, I'll pay you $5,000 to ski down that big mountain next weekend, I would look at you and be like, well, I like $5,000. I'm kind of motivated to try $5,000, but I can't ski. So I'm not getting the $5,000. So I don't know what I'm not going to even try. Like, there's no way for me. It's the same thing. So when we ask kids to do some of these very basic tasks, but they don't have the skills to do it, the sensory diet information skills they need in order to do it, we're kind of robbing them of the opportunity to try. It's too much. Mm-hmm. Think about it as it's just too much. Yeah. So I don't know what it is that someone's asking him to do. Now, here's the other thing. If it is something that he already knows how to do and has demonstrated multiple times that he knows how to do, call him on it. He's smart. Be like, hey bud, you did this last week, so I'm not playing the game. Is something wrong? Are you having a hard time right now? Mm-hmm. And give him the option. Like maybe he had a horrible day at school and you don't know about it. Maybe his bucket is just way too full and he can't handle one more thing right now. But you're cueing him into the idea that like, I know you know how to do this. Don't mess with me. Like, I know you know how to do it. And most kids will kind of wink at you. Like, I've done that before. Like, I'll say, hey, bud, like, I know you know how to do this. And they'll turn and look at me and be like, yeah, so I'm not playing. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to get some sensory information. And then we're going to do it again. And we're going to do it right. And they'll do it. Like, you just have, talk to any kid like you would any other kid all the time. Because that's the biggest disservice that I think we do with a lot of kids that are autistic or have sensory processing disorder. We kind of dumb it down and it's like, why? They're wicked brilliant. They're wicked brilliant. They just can't get it out or get it out the way you and I would get it out. So it's in there. I know it is. It's just, it's not coming out the way that you and I are used to seeing it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It doesn't mean that they can't do it. Yeah.
Kerri, we
Okay,
did get a question.
Yeah.
Is a sensory profile something that is ever completed by occupational therapists in a school setting?
Absolutely. So if you do a referral for a school-based occupational therapist, the sensory profile is actually a trademarked, copyrighted tool. And so some people will use the sensory profile. Others will use the sensory processing measure. They both give you the same information. So one isn't better than the other. It's just some therapists have a preference to the sensory processing measure, and some therapists have a preference to the sensory profile. The sensory processing measure gives the therapist a little more information of how to move forward in treating, whereas the profile kind of gives the family a little bit more information as to how to understand their child. But both operate the same way. Both operate the same way. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, and we'll get to, I'll do more on assessment in a couple minutes. So the interception, internal interception, right? It's the kiddo who is touching everything. They can't sit still. They kind of seem to be clumsy. They fall into things. Our body, proprioception at its basic definition is just your own awareness of where your body is in space. So for me right now, I am very aware that I am sitting upright. I'm in a chair. My knees are bent. I don't need to think about that. It's just there. A kid who has impaired proprioception, they are all over the place because they can't figure out where they are in space. So they'll bump into walls. They're the kid that, they're in the line walking through the school and the line stops at the water fountain and they don't. And they just keep going until they hit kid in front of them. And then they get yelled at for hitting the kid in front of them. I've seen it happen so many times. They get busted because they sat too close to the other kid in the auditorium. Now, maybe that's not happening right now with COVID, but this is the kid who's just generally too close, in their bubble. They're the kiddo that comes up and starts talking to you and they're right here and they have no awareness that they're in your personal space and you're sitting there thinking to yourself what is wrong, but they don't know. Okay, so that is a kid who has impaired proprioception. Now we use proprioception to help a kid calm down. So a kiddo who has impaired proprioception, you can imagine that's a kiddo who's really going to struggle, because here I am trying to give you deep pressure to help you, but you don't know what all that, it's hard for you to feel. So that's a kid that's going to need probably some outpatient therapy, to be very honest. Can they get it at school? Yes. Are they going to get enough? Probably not. That's probably an outpatient kiddo. The vestibular piece, this one's my favorite. I tend to be a vestibular seeker. At least I was when I was younger. I'm probably not anymore. But as vestibular seeker your vestibular is how you make sense out of your own balance. So for right now, if you think about it, the linear vestibular is very calming for the most part. You think about a seesaw, right? Or a swing where you're going back and forth. It's very calming. When you have a baby and they won't sleep, what do? You get in the chair and you rock them, and they will go to sleep. You'll often see kids with autism in a corner, kind of doing one of these, and we'll call it stimming. I don't use that word. I call that vestibular information, right? That kiddo is seeking more vestibular information. Doesn't that sound much nicer? Doesn't it sound much more like this kiddo's smart? He's figuring out what he needs to do for himself so that he can be self-sufficient, rather than saying he's stuck over there in the corner stimming. That just doesn't sound kind, right? So whereas I say, wow, look at you, buddy, you're figuring out that you need to calm down a little bit and you're doing it. That's awesome. So I like to compliment kids when they're doing stuff. I love to catch kids when they are meeting their own needs, because then I can say things like, hey, bud, that is awesome. Way to go. You figured out you needed to calm down before the teacher had to tell you you needed it, which is the hallmark of good OT. When you get to that place, it's not fast. It takes a little while. Then our rotary, man, you can't even have one of these anymore. Most playgrounds, they got rid of these because they were they were hurting kids. But we grew up with them, and you can remember these. You spawned until the point where you got thrown off. That is super alerting. So our kids who like need a little bit more help to kind of like get their energy up or get their focus up, we have swings and things that we'll use. And in some autism support classrooms, they have a swing, and you'll see a therapist spin them. Like they'll spin them to get them going. And can you do that at home? This one's a hard one to do at home. The easiest way to get rotary, like vestibular information at home, is for you to have a kiddo sit in a chair and put something like on the floor below them and make them keep going down to get it, because your head's getting the same rotary kind of movement that is going to giving your brain the same information. So think about it that way. But these are the kids that you go to the amusement park and they're like, I don't know how many of you are from central Pennsylvania and grew up here, but when we were younger, that ride, the rotor, the one that this floor dropped out and you got stuck to the wall and it went like this, somebody in here knows that dang thing. So like that would be like the ultimate vestibular experience. A kid who really seeks vestibular information, it would be in their glory in that ride, right? The kid who absolutely can't tolerate it isn't even going to make it 1 second in there. Like they're just not going to make it in that ride.
I have a quick question. So would jumping be vestibular or
Yes,
proprioceptive or both? Okay. Because it's the head for the vestibular and then for the balls of the feet for
think of it deep pressure for proprioceptive, spinning or linear for vestibular.
Oh, okay. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. Now the sensors are in their foot. The sensors are in their, your vestibular sensors are actually in the inner part of your ear. That's why when people get, oh gosh, the name just left me.
Vertigo.
Thank you. When someone gets vertigo, they usually start out with an earache or ear problem. It's like, because that's where all of your vestibular sensors are in your ears. That's where they are all at. Whereas your proprioceptors are all over your body. All right. And then the last internal one is this idea of interoception. And it's the one that is probably the least known. There's only a few researchers in the country that are actually doing a lot of work with this one. You are all super blessed because the founder of Interoception with Autism lives in Hershey. She and I are, her name is Dr. Kelly Mahler. We are research partners. And so she goes and creates all of the interventions that work on interoception. And then I grab students and do a whole bunch of research on how to see if they work or not. So I'm doing the effectiveness studies, she designing it, and it's happening like right here in Elizabethtown. So if you ever want to be part of a research study, we are always doing different things, and we would more than welcome people to join us. So here's what's happening with interoception. So proprioception was where is your body in space? Vestibular was your balance part. And then interoception is how you know how your body feels, which seems super obvious. Like if I said to anybody on this call right now, do you have to go to the bathroom? Like you could answer that, right? There's no one in here who go, I don't know. I don't know. Or if I said, are you hungry? You'd be like, yeah, I'm hungry. Or no, I just ate, I'm good, right? Now you might not have the same language for it. Like you might say something like if I said, to Kelly, like, how do you feel when you're hungry? She might say my stomach rumbles, or I get kind of weird pains, or I get lightheaded. But she would have language for it. She would know what it was. And she would know that when she feels that way, she needs to eat. Someone with impaired interoception, either A, doesn't get the signals. We're back to the same definition in the beginning, doesn't get the signals, doesn't make the right meaning, or doesn't respond to it. So they might feel that they may not even feel that they have to go to the bathroom, or they may feel they have to go, but think they have to blow their nose and don't connect them together and don't go to the bathroom. So it's things like feeling like you're thirsty, feeling like you're hungry, feeling like you're sick, feeling like you're hot, you're cold, you have to go to the bathroom, your heart races, all of those things. And so the kids who have impaired interoception, they are like my little angels, because I cannot imagine what it would be like to go through life not knowing you're in pain, right? So these are the kids you get to the doctor because the kid finally said, or they stop sleeping. So you take them to the doctor and the doctor goes, their ear infection is so bad that they broke their eardrum. Or it's the kid who when we do assessments for interoception, when we say, how do you know you're full? I've had kids say, I have no idea. 5 o'clock. I'm full at 5 o'clock. Or I'm hungry at 3:59. It's like, what the heck is that? I have no idea. What are you supposed to do with that? Like, that doesn't make any sense to a neurotypical brain, right? But if you ask the kid more questions, you'll find out, well, we always eat dinner after the Brady Bunch, and the Brady Bunch ends at 3:59. Right? So it's all logic based, but it's not like my stomach hurts and I know I need to go eat. So the kids that have impaired interoception, they really are going to struggle with doing things that happen in every day: eating, bathroom, sleep, all of those things. So more and more and more OTs are starting to say, we need to work on this and this first, because if we don't work here, the rest is harder. So we need to make sure this is good. And then we can worry about where your body is in space. Because if you don't even know like how your body feels, like how are you going to know where you are in the chair? Like it's not going, we have to do this one first. So it's becoming more popular. We're seeing lots of information out about it. There's tons and tons of studies happening right now. And it's super fun work because the kids make progress really fast. So I'll give you one little insight. We did a study with 100 kids and we did interoception awareness intervention for 8 weeks. And of the 100 kids, 68% of them made improvements on emotional regulation in 8 weeks. So think about that. Like how many of your kids have been getting therapy, getting like behavioral stuff for years, right? And you're not really seeing measurable improvement in years, let alone in 8 weeks. And these were kids who had, some were autistic, some had ADHD, they all had impaired interoception. But many actually had lower IQ levels. There were some that were not verbal. So it didn't seem to, it was definitely something that worked for all of the kids who needed that kind of work. So it's super, it's definitely going to get bigger and better. All right. So who assesses sensory processing, right? Who does that? It's an occupational therapist. We're really the only ones that are certified to actually assess sensory processing. Now, will someone who has a developmental degree or a behavior specialist or someone tell you that they assess it? They will. And they're right to an extent, but they're doing it through observation and they're doing it through their lens. They're not doing it through a true sensory processing lens. When occupational therapists go to school, we go to school for minimum of 5 years. We have to have a master's degree. The entry level right now is actually closer to a doctorate, but we have to have a master's degree. In that master's degree, there is at least 4 courses in there that are entirely wrapped up in understanding the sensory system. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but someone who is a behavioral specialist or a developmental therapist, there's very little information even about the brain, let alone about how the sensory system works within the brain. So if you want a true sensory processing evaluation, you really need to find an occupational therapist to do it. And then they're going to choose whatever tool that they feel most comfortable with. And there's no best or no, it's not, it's good. Whatever they're choosing they've chosen it for a reason, and they're good. Sensory profile or a sensory processing measure. You as a parent can request that any school district do an occupational therapy evaluation and that they use the sensory profile or the sensory processing measure. When you put that in writing, you send it to your district, and they have to do it. So if you haven't had it done yet and the bells and whistles are going off in your head and you're like, this sounds like my kid, you have every right to ask for that in a school, and they would be hard pressed not to offer it. There's also the interoception awareness. You can ask to have that evaluated as well. If you have a kiddo that you notice, like they just don't seem to ever take a drink, or they never seem full, or they throw up a lot, like they'll eat until they throw up and don't seem to see the cues for like when to stop. I mean, those are really good signs. Or they're the kiddo that you're always in the doctor and you're clueless that they are even sick and they didn't even act like they were sick. That would be a kid. Or they fall. That's a really big hallmark. They fall and they don't even tell you they hurt. They just see blood and then they'll say, oh, I'm bleeding, but there's no initial pain response. The last way you can really look at it is observation of routines, meaning like I can watch a kid on the playground and I can pretty much say, yep, that's some sensory seeking going on there. Or I would still want a sensory profile or a sensory processing measure, but I can, there are therapists out there who can watch kids and be like, yeah, I can pretty much figure out where to go based on watching what's going on. The last one is the sensory integration praxis test. And I know that, Lakin mentioned that one in the promo, and that's certainly an option. The sensory integration praxis test takes 6 hours to administer. Most of our kids don't have the attention span to actually engage in that test. Okay. Am I certified to offer it? I let the certification go because it frankly people weren't asking for it. Because the report is so complicated when it comes back that no one understands it. So even if I do a SIPT, which is what most people will call it, I'll know what to do from here, but I'll have like 10 more hours of explaining to mom and dad what it means and what to do with it. And most school districts and insurance companies do not want to pay me 10 hours to explain my report. Like they just have no desire to do that. So when you can get the same information from the sensory profile, the sensory processing measure, and those tools take about 30 minutes to do, and you walk away with information on what to do next, most therapists and most school districts feel that that's a better way to go. It doesn't mean they're not willing to do a SIPT. They are. If you demand it, they will. But you can only do it for a kiddo from the ages of 6 to 12. That's it. And it does take 6 hours to do. And it's intense. Like you can expect, if you do a SIPT evaluation, you can expect your kid to come home miserable because it is really hard, like super hard. So before I move on, questions? I explained that part. That was the one I thought we would get questions on. There you go. Okay, so once you have this eval done and you've done this, then it's like, okay, now what? Well, there are 2 different kinds of occupational therapy. And then there's also the parent route of how to help things. So the occupational therapist is going to either do sensory integration therapy or they're going to do OT without SI. So if someone says that they're doing SI, sensory integration therapy, it means that they are in a room that has nothing in it but padded floor and some sensory apparatus. So like a tunnel, a swing, maybe a ball pit. That's it. There's nothing else in there. There's no one else. And it's a white room with very little stimulation. Okay, so you go into that room, and a sensory integration therapist would be that the therapist is not in charge. They literally just present the stuff and they let the child direct whatever it is they want to do with that. So the kiddo would come in and they might swing from the trapeze, they might land in the ball pit, they might roll around in the tunnel, they might do those things, and they would do that multiple times a week. There are SI rooms in schools in central Pennsylvania, but that's true SI. It's child directed. It is sensory experiment, and the kid basically tries to mess around to figure out what their own natural response should be. We don't do a lot of it because it's super expensive. It takes, multiple times a week. You need one room. That means I'm treating one kid at a time. And it takes a lot of hours of it. It's very effective. It's highly effective, but it's not necessarily readily available. Okay. But it's very effective. If you have a kiddo that is really sensory disorganized, it's very effective. The other way would be to do it without SI, and you would still include sensory processing activities. And often you're going to hear that called a sensory diet, right? You're going to hear a therapist say, okay, well, this kiddo is seeking proprioception, so I'm going to give him proprioceptive activities in his basket of tricks that he can then do. In a school-based setting, you're going to see that implemented in the specially designed instruction section of the IEP. Like you're going to have an IEP, there's going to be a therapist involved, and the therapist is going to put activities that everybody else on the team is going to use prior to a meltdown. So it should never be used as a way like this kid is having a really bad day. They just threw a chair. So now we're going to let them be in the sensory room. No, that's not a sensory diet. That's a behavioral reward. That's different. If I'm using a sensory processing approach, I'm saying, I'm going to make sure this kid gets all the sensory information they need so that they can respond and do whatever it is they need to do. I'm not using it as a punishment or a reward. So it's again that same question that we were talking about with Kelly earlier. Like it's two different ways to view the child. You're viewing the child as a child who needs all of this input and all of this information in order to do well. What are some of the things that you would put on a sensory diet? Well, it's really going to depend on the kid, right? But like Kelly's little guy, like the chin thing, I would come up with ways to replace that. I might put him on a scooter to go down the hall, right? Like I might have him riding down the hall on a scooter with me pulling him, with some kind of a TheraBand. I may have him yanking away and through the school. Like there's a million different things. It's going to be based on whatever this child likes. It needs to be individualized. If this child hates wagons, I'm not putting him on a wagon, but if it's a kid who likes that, then I'm going to do it. So it's going to be really individualized, which is why the therapist really has to pay attention to what your kid likes and what your kid does not like. And it's why we as parents have to be incredible advocates. So the limitations of occupational therapy without SI is that there aren't as many effectiveness studies. There aren't as many studies out there that say that like this actually does work when you're going to do it because it's so individualized. You're like, how do I do a randomized control trial that shows that this sensory-based diet is working for Max, but it's also working for John, and it's also working for Sarah? Well, I can't because John's is different than Sarah's and Sarah's is different than so-and-so's. So we get a little caught up right now in the autism community about, evidence-based approaches, which what we do should be evidence-based. But when we come to sensory processing, it is so individualized that it is really hard to then turn around and say, okay, well, now I'm going to do it and I'm going to duplicate it so that I can put it into a study and throw it in a journal. It just doesn't work like that. It works in a way that when you come to me and you say my kiddo has trouble with picky eating, and I say, okay, we're going to use a sensory approach and we're going to embed all these cool things for them to be able to do, and we're going to do it, right? It works because the kiddo is eating better, but doesn't work in terms of putting that into a journal. So you're not going to read a lot about the second one in journals. Sadly, you're just not, because we can't duplicate it times 100. That is partly why Kelly and I do the work we do with Interoception, because we can prove that we can narrow that down into something very small, do it for a limited period of time, and it does work for lots and lots and lots and lots of kids. So you'll see more of that. But if you're looking for a straight, like, does OT work for tactile defensiveness, you might not find anything, because it's all so individualized. It has to be. What works for Kelly's son isn't going to work for somebody else's kiddo. What works for my son isn't going to work for someone else's son. And you think about it, what works for you personally when you need to pay attention, what is it that you do when you need to pay attention? And would that work for your spouse or for your children? Probably not. We each have our own way of coming up with how we're going to enable our body to do what it is it needs to do. So the parent role in kind of how we move forward with this, and the first one is super, I really want you to leave tonight with this idea of empathy, right? And what does that mean? It means that I wholeheartedly believe that kids are doing the absolute best they can all the time. They are working so hard to manage all the sensory information that's coming into their body. If you just think about you right now, close your eyes for a second and think about all the sensory information that you have been bombarded with just today, or just in the last hour. What have you smelled in the last hour? What have you seen? What have you touched? Where has your body been? What kind of feelings have you had? You and I have a typically developing neurosystem. And if you really think about all the things that we handled in an hour, it's a lot. It's a lot. And so our kids are going to school for 6-7 hours. They're right. Okay, step back. Think about the bus. Okay, what is the bus? What sensory information is the bus giving you? Insane vestibular information, right? Like some of our buses, you're bouncing all over the place. It's like they are very overwhelming. We have kids that can't handle the bus, but they're on the bus because they don't, you're making them get on, like they're getting on the bus. So they get, by the time they get off the bus, they've already kind of gone into shutdown for the day, right? So by the time, think about everything that happened at school, by the time they come home from school, they are exhausted from a sensory perspective. So I often find that parents deal with behavior that's a little bit more off than what we see in schools. And a lot of times parents will tell me like, I don't know what is going on, but my kid is bouncing off the walls when they walk through the door. And I'll say, okay, well, what are the teachers saying? And the teachers are saying, it's fine. It's like, okay, so they're working so hard to hold it together all day that by the time they get to you, they know you're safe and they got to let loose a little. Right. So oftentimes that's when I'll say to families, like, this is where, a trampoline isn't a bad idea. It's not. Or a bath. Maybe you want to switch your bath time to right after school so that they can come home and get some great proprioception. Or maybe this is the kid that needs to karate lessons, or the kid that needs to wrestle, or the kid that needs to do something really active right after school. Or maybe they're the kid that needs a refrigerator box that has Christmas lights in it that they can just go hang out in for after school. So when you come at it with the perspective of like, this kiddo is doing everything they possibly can to hold it together, they're doing the best they can with what they've been dealt, your approach changes. And you can do things like, hey, buddy, like it looks like you're having a really hard time. Can we work together on this? Like, just acknowledging, it looks like you're having a hard time. Looks like you're struggling. It looks like this is hard. Like that, just saying that in and of that himself, rather than be like, stop jumping, stop moving, all of the things that you want to say, right? You're not going to get real far with it. It's just like the pizza. So empathy is the biggest thing. There are some great books out there that I highly recommend. The first one is Uniquely Human. It's not going to show up well. Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism by Barry M. Present, PhD. It's a phenomenal book there. It's coming in. So Uniquely Human, it's on Amazon, not hard to find. The other one is, my copy isn't even here yet, but Della Hook. If you haven't read anything by Della Hook, you spell the last one Delhoke. She's a PhD. She has phenomenal understanding of how to approach a kid and really kind of mold behavior. She's exceptional. So those are the two books that I would really recommend. The other thing, the parent role, is just to understand, like, you're doing an amazing job just by coming here tonight, just by listening to pieces of it. And I keep asking, when your kid is doing a certain thing that doesn't make sense to you, keep asking, what is that? Ask your OT that you're working with, or if you're not working one, get one. And there's lots of them available, and start asking like, hey, what is it? Like, why are they doing this? But what I want you to think about is that if you have a behavior you don't like it's like for, Kelly, was the chin thing. For some kids, it's like licking. Licking is a pretty popular one. The kids will lick their desk. They'll lick it's like, we don't want kids licking things. Like, that's not a good, right? Especially not in today's germ world. Like, we don't really want kids running around licking things, so, or there's other behaviors that you don't like. You need to have your OT or you help to figure out what is it that they're getting from that. And then how can I replace it? So licking, a really good water bottle where they have to work hard in order to get the juice up from it, or water, or whatever it is, that would certainly be a replacement. Just know that when you take a behavior away, whether you replace it or not, the child will replace it. So I've often been in situations where I've had family members say to me, like, we screwed up. This kiddo was biting and we didn't like the biting. And so we basically punished him for biting, which I understand why you would punish someone for biting, but we punished him. And now they are doing some other behavior that is like much worse. So, masturbation, all kinds of other things. Like, so they will replace whatever it is you take away. If it is something that they need from a sensory perspective, if you take it away, they will replace it. So you're better off as a parent to have replacements ready to go before you distinguish it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I actually have
Yeah.
it's kind of a quirky one that I can't figure out for the life of me where it comes from or what he's seeking. But he has with his stomach, and he loves pressure on his stomach. He loves cold temperature on his stomach, and he's constantly pressing his stomach into the dog, into our refrigerator. I don't know how I can replace that because like I'm scared of the pressure that he puts on his stomach. And also it is kind of obviously socially inappropriate.
Yeah. Does he have pain? Like, does he have GI issues?
Yeah, he does have GI issues, but it's almost constant. And it's really when he, he's had his normal diet. It's just like it's particularly with our dog. He's like obsessed with laying across our dog with his just stomach right on him.
I think he's trying to tell you he's in pain.
Okay, because he does have GERD, and I know that he does have acid reflux, but it just seems it's all the
treated.
Yes, he's on a medication for it,
and we know the medicine's working.
Well, I know that it's reduced. He has a lot of because he also eats until he's sick, so that's another thing.
He's an Interoception kiddo.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, potty training issues across the board. Yeah.
You need an OT who understands Interoception, and if you can't find one, I will gladly do it pro bono. Like, I don't charge to do that kind of stuff. So, or we'll put you in a research study or something. We'll get you some help. But that's definitely it's Interoception, and it's related to his gut health. So, back in the beginning, I said I have nutrition certification. So I went on further to school because I kept getting all these referrals for kids that had these horrific GI systems, kids that, only pooped once a week, or kids that eat nothing but chicken nuggets. And I kept getting the referral for picky eating, or I would get it for like, they don't sleep. And I did all the sensory stuff, right? I did the whole like sensory diet, and I did SOS, which is like a way to kind of move from picky eat. I did all the OT stuff, and it wasn't working. And I felt that there were some kids that needed more. So I went back to school for functional medicine about 6 years ago. And that's when I connected the gut health with the interoception, which is a whole separate, like that's like a 2-week talk, right? Because it gets really complicated. But understand that a child's gut health is 100% related to their sensory processing skills. And why? Right. If you think about it, their sensory your sensory receptors are in your gut lining. All your interoceptors, we talked about where the proprioceptors were. Well, there's more in the gut lining, but the interoceptors, they're in the gut wall. And when you make when the interoceptors, when the receptors aren't happy, they don't produce serotonin. When we don't have serotonin, that's our happy hormone. And so our happy hormone helps us regulate our behavior, regulate our emotional response, all of that. So if we're not producing serotonin because our gut wall isn't happy, sensory isn't going to work out well either. So they're all 100% connected, and they're actually connected through the vagus nerve. So we're starting to learn that like our vagus nerve is responsible for our gut brain connection.
Polyvagal theory. Yeah, because that was in Della Hook. I'm currently reading one of her books, and she goes into that quite a lot. And I almost wonder if that has something to tie in with why children on the spectrum also are often epileptic, because isn't that all kind of related?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and if you can treat epilepsy through eating more fat, right? Like you can, not always, but a lot of times kids have a fat deficiency. Well, why do they have a fat deficiency? They're eating fat. They're not processing it. And it's because their gut wall is leaky. So it's whatever they're eating they're not getting the amount of nutrients out of it that they should. It's like kind of going out into the bloodstream. It's why you see kids with sensory processing disorder, ADHD, autism being much more reactive to like red dye 40. You know, like the average child can eat jelly beans and they're not like off the walls, right? But the kids with autism, with sensory processing disorder, ADHD, they eat jelly beans and they are like, you're like, what the heck? It's just a jelly bean. Well, it makes sense if you think about it from a gut health perspective, because their gut wall isn't tight. So if their gut wall isn't tight, the red dye 40 is in the bloodstream. It's not in the digestive system. Our digestive system knows how to get rid of toxins beautifully. Our bloodstream does not. Our bloodstream was never meant to process, you know, let's just use a common food. Bugles are, for some reason, kids with autism love bugles. I don't know why, but they do. I mean, and if we think about bugles, there are weird corn that is like genetically weird. And then it's BHT and it's high fructose corn syrup and salt. That's what's in them. And BHT is styrofoam. So if, you know, we're putting styrofoam into their belly, so how would I, in the world, would I expect their brain to respond to appropriate sensory information when I put styrofoam in it? Like, if you think about it just from that angle, like, I can't expect a kid to perform well when I didn't fuel them well. It's back to the car, right? Like if you eat nothing, like, yes, the tank is like, if you go to the gas station and you fill your car with water, the tank will be full, but the car's not going to go anywhere because it's not the right fuel. So our brain is very similar. It's why I went back to school for that. Like, because it was like, I got to put this all together, because if I don't, like, we can't be in a world where kids eat nothing but marshmallows and root beer, but then I'm doing SI. Well, what the heck? Like, that doesn't go together. And I'm not saying kids have to have perfect diets. And I'm not someone, like, I'm not go to the grocery store and buy nothing but organic. Like, crunchy moms, like, this world is too expensive for crunchy right now. Like, I'm not, now, if you can do that, amen to you, right? But like, do you have to? No, you do not. But you do have to be aware of the connection between what's going in their body from a food world to what you're expecting them to do from a brain world, because they are connected.
And I'm sorry to interrupt again, but
No.
what would you say about like specific diets? Because I know you know, we're plant-based already, but we tried gluten-free, we tried the probiotic. He seemed to get bloated with that. So is that like research-based with the gluten, because it's supposed to be anti-inflammatory? Would you recommend going gluten-free?
So that's going to depend on you and a conversation with your doctor, right? But
Yeah.
I would say that the research would say that gluten and or lectins. So, I mean, a lot of people who are vegans or vegetarians eat a lot of beans. Lectins can be every bit as difficult as gluten.
Oh, okay.
So it could be a lectin thing. Like, I don't know, without meeting him, without seeing him, without kind of looking at his belly, like, I'd have to do that. I have to look at that. The
Mhm.
average occupational therapist is not going to be someone who's going to know those different components. But because I went back to school, I do have that piece. If you ever want to have a consult, I'm happy to help you with
I definitely will take you up on that, because currently
Yeah.
we are out clinical OT because of behaviors. He had to, the therapist wanted to put a hold on our services. So he is not getting any outside OT outside of his school.
Bummer. I say
Yeah.
find another OT that's willing to help you, because there's
I'm
plenty of them
trying.
out there that are. But that whole connection between sensory processing and gut health, it's pretty strong.
Yeah.
It's pretty strong.
Thank
And
you.
would I say, like, yes, you should be gluten-free, or yes, you should be dairy-free? It really depends on the person. Like, some people do need to be gluten-free. Some do need to be dairy-free. You can always try it. You're not hurting a child at this point if you try gluten-free. And if they don't feel better in a few weeks, then you'll be like, okay, well, that didn't work. But if they do feel better, you can be like, wow, that was okay. Let's do this. The kid will tell you 100%. Like, my son doesn't want to admit that he's butter gluten-free, but he doesn't. He wants to eat pizza, but he will look at you and say, like, Mom, I feel better when I don't eat it. Does he still eat the pizza sometimes? Yes, but he will also then be like, well, I did it to myself. I feel like crap and I did it. Like, so he at least acknowledges that there's a connection and that he could have chosen something else, but he's also 17. He's older. So it does get better. That other piece is understanding that the whole sensory processing piece, it's a foundational skill. And we've talked a little bit about this, but like, if you don't have the sensory information that you need and you're not able to make sense out of it, I really can't expect you to be doing higher level types of things. So until those needs are met, I'm kind of nasty if I'm asking you to do stuff that you can't do. And so really need to meet that foundational skill before we can expect higher level things from kiddos. Your biggest role is going to be advocacy, like big time, you know, being a strong advocate. You're on this call, which means you definitely are paying attention, but you have to ask for what you need for your kiddo. Like, you've got to be like, hey, I'm hearing this stuff about sensory processing. I don't think his needs are being met. Can we look at it again? And you know, that doesn't mean you're like asking, that doesn't mean you're going to due process. It doesn't mean you're being mean. It doesn't mean you're being the difficult parent. Like, it just means you're advocating for what your kiddo deserves. And there's a nice way to do it. And there's a way that will get you nowhere, right? So I think you always start with the way that's nice. And if it's not working out well, then you know you have people that'll help you advocate or find more, because there's definitely therapists out there willing to help you advocate for sure. And then the environmental piece, I think, is super important for parents. Like, when you know the bright lights bother your child, like, warn them before they go into something that say, hey, this is probably gonna be pretty bright. Do you want to bring your sunglasses? You know, there's little things you can do throughout your day that can help kind of minimize that assault or that impact. And kids do describe it as an assault. Like, we're doing a lot of research right now with adults who have had sensory processing issues for like their entire childhood. And they will tell you things like, when I went to Walmart as a kid, hearing the lights was so loud that it sounded like 7,000 crickets in my head. Like, and to me, that's like, what do you mean 7,000 crickets? Like, there's 7,000 crickets in your head? And they're like, yes. Like, they say it very clearly. And like, I don't understand that. Or they'll say things like, you know, this therapist made me use metal utensils. And it sounded like someone was cutting my insides out from within. Now that, I don't understand that. Like, to me, it's a fork, and I'm like, well, it's a fork. But they will describe it at levels that it's like nothing you can understand. And I think I've had kids say to me even things like, I lived in a house where like I had a brother and a dad, and I could tell which person was in the bathroom by the sound of the stream when they peed. That's how acute their hearing is, right? So can you imagine being bombarded by that all day long, and then someone saying to you like, well, you gotta like put on your coat and go outside or whatever, and you're like, I'm just trying to deal with the fact that I can't, like, I'm hearing everything, you know, but you don't have the words to say it. So I think that, you know, when we know we're going into a really loud environment, what's wrong with handing kids some earmuffs or handing kids a hoodie to put up over their head so that they don't have to, we can filter some of it out. They make amazing noise canceling headphones now. And they don't even, they look like earpods, like the AirPods that everybody else is wearing. So you don't even look weird to put them in. You know, so you stick those AirPods in there that are noise canceling. They're like $20 on Amazon. They're not expensive. So I can stick them in there, and then I can go into the restaurant and suddenly I can manage the fact that dad is chewing, because I don't like the way that sounds either, right? But I can manage the fact that he's doing it because I'm not having to deal with all the noise in the restaurant on top of it. So just helping, you know, I like to do activity analysis or like environment analysis. Like when I'm walking into some place, I like to kind of like look around and be like, okay, what would, if I was one of these kids, what would I be experiencing? And then try to like back chain it. Like, how could I make it easier for them? Nothing wrong with wearing a hat. Nothing wrong with you know, there's just nothing wrong with any of that stuff. I don't think. That's me, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I gave you a lot. I feel like I gave you, and if you want more information in any one area, I'm happy to, but I didn't want to overwhelm you to the point where you're like, oh my God, these OT people are crazy. questions? Any particular quirky like stuff that you want to use the group in order to help problem solve?
Hi.
Hi.
So I have two questions.
Yeah.
One is on interoception because I had actually not heard that before. So I have a 15-year-old who is on the spectrum and has an intellectual disability. He has gotten OT since he was about 2 years old. We stopped a couple of years ago because he just kind of stalled out and hadn't really made any progress. He still gets it at school, but it's more school-based. So I had actually not heard that term before tonight, but a few things kind of definitely like kind of perked for me. I was just very curious about that because to this date, like we have always had issues with him not really knowing whether or not he is full. He will eat until he gets sick. He also, though, has a lot of GI issues, gastroparesis being one of them. So he will eat until he will trigger a gastroparesis incident. He doesn't, when he eats, he doesn't really know what things taste like. He's not aware. He will eat, and then at the end, he will say like, oh, I didn't like that, but he's already eaten like a full meal. He's not really aware, like I can't tell if he's sick or not. He is verbal. He is very verbal, but he just, it gets to the point where it's obvious, like he's got a very, very like dry cough kind of thing. And then I'm like, hey, bud, like you don't look very well. What's wrong? And he's like, oh, I don't know, like nothing.
Yeah.
You know, like he will fall down and hurt himself, and you know, we will see like obviously he's bleeding, but he doesn't, it's just not a thing for him, and this is just always how it's been. And you know, after hearing that word, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is definitely
So there's a
what's going
Facebook
on.
group that Kelly manages, but it's called Interoception, the Eighth Sense. I would invite you to join that group because you're gonna find the last time I checked, there was like 10,000 people in there, and they're mostly parents, parents and therapists, and they are all talking exactly about what you're talking about, and that's going to give you some ideas of ways to approach it. If he is still getting a school-based therapy, I would ask that they look at his interoception, and if they say we don't know what you're talking about, you're more than welcome. And what school district are you in?
So we're in South Middleton.
They might not know, but their IU in your area does. Like I know they do because Kelly and I have done the in-service there. So I know they know. So they would have access to people who could help it. And interoception in and of itself, it's essentially mindfulness, but it's done in a more concrete way for kids with autism. So like you would, and here's the thing about interoception, like the last 2 years have been hard for everybody, right? And anytime you have trauma, sometimes we turn it off.
And that's the other component. He is adopted and had significant birth through 2 trauma. So that was kind of with his food stuff, that was always where we assumed his inability to stop himself came from, but it never went away.
Yeah.
You know, he's almost 16 and it's still a very significant issue.
So when there's trauma, we turn off our interoception. It's a protective mechanism, and it's we do it on purpose. So you right now, it's kind of like the whole world is kind of in a trauma response to what we've kind of gone through. And so you can tell, like, people now, like I can't even tell you how many people have reached out to me as a health coach and been like, I have gained 20 pounds, right? Because they're just not paying attention to like signals, right? It's like, I don't care, I'm watching Netflix for 4 days, and so I'm just going to eat while I'm watching Netflix, and I don't care if I'm full, I'm just going to keep going. Like, it's because it's a soothing thing. So the whole world is kind of trying to figure out how to turn back on their body
Mhm.
signals, because we had to, frankly, I mean, you can say whatever you want about masks. Like I have no opinion, but many of the kids that I work with are tactically defensive. And we've
Mhm.
had them in masks now for almost a year and a half. So they
Yeah.
don't tolerate their clothes well. And you want to throw a mask on top of them yet?
Mhm.
That is a massive sensory assault. And we had to do it for health reasons, and I understand that, but we're all now trying to figure out, well, how do I undo that damage? Like, because there is psychological and neuro
Mhm.
responses that are changed, and so we have to figure out how to, work
Yeah.
through that. But I would ask him, it would be really interesting to me, and I think ask him how he knows when he's full, because I've had kids tell me that full, if you say, how does full feel?
Mhm.
They will say, when my neck pulses.
Huh.
And that is actually your vagal nerve right before you vomit.
That would not surprise me at all with
And
how.
so what his is really easy. All you have to do is teach him that, like, no, you're full. You start with pants that are a little bit too tight. You put them in them to eat, and you
Yeah.
say, okay, you're full when you feel your pants get tight. When you feel
Mhm.
your pants push out, you're full, you're done.
Mhm.
And then you go back to regular size clothes, and then you're like, no, if you feel if your belly's pushing on your pants, you are done.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you have to teach them new cues, because
Mhm.
they believe that it's when their neck pulses or when they throw
Huh.
up. And so it's just a
Yeah.
matter of saying, like, this is the new cue. Or, you know what, I have kids that say, well, I on one of the evaluations we did, I asked a little girl when she's thirsty,
Mhm.
and she told me when she goes to the ER for liquids.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, well, honey, like, you're way past thirsty once
Mhm.
you're in the ER for
Yep.
hydration. Like,
Yeah.
do you feel any kind of tickle in your throat, or do you feel like, and she's like, oh, I thought that was like frogs. And I was like, no, that's, you're thirsty. She's like, okay, got it. And from that point on,
Yep.
we basically did you need to drink every 4 hours, or every 2
Yeah.
hours, you need to take a drink. And we kind of programmed her to be able to do those things. And
Mhm.
so this isn't like, interoception is not rocket science.
Mhm.
Like, you probably don't need a 5-year degree to do it. But
Yeah.
you do need a degree in order to understand why you're doing it. But
Mhm.
it's not like, parents can, honestly, if you purchase the curriculum, you could do the whole thing yourself. It's not expensive.
Well, I definitely appreciate
Yeah.
appreciate this.
And
It's
I've
definitely.
had a lot of parents say to me, I thought I was losing my mind. The
Mhm.
one kiddo that we asked, like, how you feel, how you know if you're full, when we first interviewed him, he said, I have no idea. It's like 5 o'clock whenever the news comes on. And we did
Mhm.
8 weeks of interoception work with him. And then
Mhm.
afterward, we asked him, how do you know if you're full? And he said, it's 6 medium-sized pillows. Like, what? 6 like, who says that, right? 6 medium-sized pillows. But, like, I don't care what their answer is. It's not
Yeah.
about getting the right answer. It's not
Yeah.
about getting the answer that matters to me. It's about the
Yeah.
fact that he knew he's full and he stopped eating. So, like,
Yep.
that, I don't get real caught up in the
Mhm.
language on it.
Yeah.
Like, I've had all kinds of crazy things that kids have said, but like, when you even ask things like, how does your body feel when you're calm? Like, that's a really interesting one. And kids will say, like, well, I'll be calm when I'm dead. I've gotten that answer more than once. I'm like,
Mhm.
what? You'll be calm when you're dead? Like, no. We got to learn how to get calm while we're still
Yeah.
here. We got to learn how to feel good in our bodies while we're still here.
Absolutely.
But they do have, like, the more verbal they are, the more you can understand it. But it is sad when you start hearing some of their stories.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, what I would assume to be a traumatic experience, like, a tiger chased me down, it's like, that's
Mhm.
bad, right? But like,
Yeah.
a strawberry coming out is not gonna get me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can't imagine being traumatized, like, all day long by the
Mhm.
different things that are invading my world that I have no control over.
My other quick question was actually, so I also have a 7-year-old who has SPD. And so he is a very, very, very picky eater, and a picky clothing wearer. Your sock story kind of made me laugh because he does not wear socks, will not wear socks, obviously has to wear socks because it's winter and it's cold. But he I just realized why he does it, but he has arrows on his socks, the brand that we get, and the arrows have to be lined up exactly in the middle or he completely loses it. And
You can
I
get
thought
socks that are seamless.
no, he wants the arrow because it
Oh, he
has
wants
to be
the,
in the
okay,
middle.
so amen to him. He
Control.
figured out how to adapt.
Yes.
That's awesome. I would
it drove
compliment
me
the heck
nuts
out of him for that.
until tonight, because I guess if he has to wear the socks, they need to
Yeah.
be in the middle. But so it was
Yeah.
more of a comment, but it just made me really
Yeah.
really kind of
Hey,
rethink some of
you know what? If the kids are figuring out a way to adapt, you need
Yeah.
to compliment the heck out of them. And then the next time they run into a challenge, like whatever it is, like maybe
Yeah.
it's the food or whatever, you say, hey, you know how you figured that out with your socks? Do you have any ideas of how we could make like this dinner work? You were brilliant with the socks. Like you figured those socks out, and like over compliment that. Be like, you did such a great job with the socks. Like, what ideas do you have for how we could make dinner better? Like, I pretend I don't know. Like I do a lot of like pretend stupidity, kind of, where I'll be like, gosh, I just have no good ideas for this. Like I'm really kind of relying on you because you figured out those socks so well. And so what are your ideas? And they won't have them immediately, but you'd be surprised within a few days, they'll start to do stuff and you'll be like, oh, look at him trying to figure that out.
Yeah,
You're way better off if the kid figures it out than if a therapist.
Oh yeah. He's like he has 5 foods that he will eat. So, but he definitely controls like the brand, the way we make them, how we put them on the plate, all of that. And it drives me absolutely nuts. But now thinking about it, like he's very controlling about it, and it makes
So that
sense.
he knows what he can handle. He knows what he
Yeah.
can tolerate without losing it. And so
Yep.
he's going to do that because he doesn't want to lose it.
Yep. So thank you for that. I
So
definitely
if you
appreciate
want
that.
to start like branching out into new foods, the
Yes.
only way to really do new foods is to do one new food at a time. One. And it can take you like 6 months to get that one.
So
like it's
would you-
exhausting.
Would you recommend, and we are looking for an OT for him, but we have come up across some wait lists around us without driving like an hour. But would you recommend not even putting items that he doesn't like on the plate?
No.
Okay. And
It's
just
a
letting
visual
him.
assault. Like if you're just kind of making a mess.
Okay. All right.
And it's not, I mean, that's what other parents do. Like it's not, there's no fault in it.
Yeah.
So the only way to really introduce a food is to pick one food. And like, it should be something that you're willing to have at your table for the next forever. So, like a strawberry, a piece of apple, broccoli spear, something like that. And you have to start with him. It just stays on the table. It's not on his plate. It's just on the table. And you have to let it be there until he's not freaking out anymore.
Okay.
Once he's good about it just being on the table, then it goes to his plate. He doesn't have to touch it. It does not touch his other foods, but it has to stay there.
Yes. Okay.
And then once he's once he's done having a mess about that, because you will for a while, then he has to touch it.
Okay.
Right? Just touch it. And it can be like the most ridiculous touch you ever imagined, like finger and like, I got it. Like, that's it. Right. And that can last for weeks. Like, it's okay. He just has to touch it once a day, every day, same food. Then he has to pick it up and bring it to his chin.
Okay.
Put it back down. Then he has to bring it up and put it to his lip.
Then
he has to actually touch it with his tongue.
Okay.
Then he has to put it in his mouth. He can still spit it out. Then he has to chew it. He can still spit it out. And then finally he has to swallow it.
Okay.
You're basically desensitizing them over it's a very slow process. And the more you force it, the longer it will take you to introduce, you'll have to start over.
Okay.
So you have to go with one thing and do the one thing every day, once a day. Now, if you go out to eat or whatever, like don't get crazy. Like you can skip a day here and there, but it's one food and it's doing that. And then what happens is that first food, it could take you 6 months to get the first food down his throat. But then after that, the like the next one will take like half that time. The next one will take a third. And then usually you can just go because you have to take away the the adrenaline response. So
Mhm.
once a kid gets freaked out, the adrenaline runs.
Yep.
When your adrenaline runs, your digestion stops. So now you're not hungry anymore. And it's a protective mechanism, right? If a
Mhm.
tiger's chasing me, my energy has to be spent running away from the tiger, not
Yeah.
eating a donut,
Yeah.
like it's our body is made to run or fight, flight, or fright, right? It's our body
Mhm.
is made to run or to get the heck out whenever there's a problem. So when
Yep.
they perceive the food as the problem, so now they're like running from the dinner table.
Mhm.
Or they'll do whatever it is in their power to avoid it. And it's like, it's not rational. You can't logic your way out of it. You're not
Yeah.
going to talk your way out of it.
Yeah.
You just have to let them be with it and let
Okay.
the response dwindle over time.
Okay.
And you
Thank
can do
you.
lots of proprioception and good stuff right before dinner. Like I have kids, I'll have kids set the table, they're moving around. I'll do jumping jacks. Like put everybody's plates on, do 5 jumping jacks, put
Mhm.
everybody's knife down, 5 jumping
Oh,
jacks.
he's a massive movement seeker.
Yep.
So we do a
Yeah,
lot of
he
that
needs
stuff.
like good pressure right before meal times,
Yep.
and you'll get it. It's just not going to be fast.
Yeah.
And then I usually tell parents, like, we didn't get here to 5 foods overnight. Like you did not
Mhm.
land in a place of having 5 foods overnight.
Yeah.
It happened
No.
gradually, happened
Yeah.
slowly. So we're
Yeah.
not going to get out of it overnight either.
Yeah.
It takes twice as long to fix something as it did to
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah.
So it's just patience and slow.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Lisette had put in the chat that she was wondering if you were referring to a specific curriculum or was it just in general, I guess with the interoception that.
There is a specific curriculum that has been proven to work for kids with autism for interoception. And it is, it's Dr. Kelly Mahler's interoception awareness curriculum. And you can get it right. She has a website and you can find it through her Facebook page. It's about $200, but from it, you could do anything you needed to do. And if you are in a situation where that's not doable, reach out to me and we'll see what we can work out. Maybe there's a research study we can be part of or something like that. So I did put my contact information there. That's my email. And then I gave you my phone number. You're welcome to use it. You're welcome to give it out. And then you can always find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. My profile is just Kerri Hample on all of it. If you get really stuck, you can go to Elizabethtown College's website and click on me from there too. So lots of different ways to find me. I do provide consultations pro bono. I do not charge for consultations. I make my income through Elizabethtown. So I do not do that. I do, in full disclosure, I do partner with some nutrition companies that, yes, I do get a kickback from some of them, but I only recommend that when we're in a situation where I've got a kiddo who is just not thriving and we need to do some supplements in order to get them where they need to go. So certainly not always. I use real food as much as possible. Other questions? Lakin, anything that I missed that you wanted me to cover?
Honestly, I think you gave us more information than what
Okay.
I thought was actually going to be covered. I'm going to ask, are you planning on writing a book anytime in the future? Because I would love to read a book that you would write.
So yes, actually there is one started. The first one is for toileting, because that's the thing that people are struggling with the most. If you go onto that interoception page, that's the thing that's causing the most embarrassment for kids, and it's the thing that people are really stumped on. So that book will be first. I have published a couple things, and if you search my name, you can find some of those. Not a book yet. And I do run a Facebook group in there that I go live periodically and talk about different topics related to anxiety, sensory processing disorder, depression, food, all that good stuff. So, and yeah, the book someday, it's coming.
I'll be looking for it.
I would encourage you, if you just want like basic sensory information, basic sensory book is The Out of Sync Child. It's fantastic. It's written for parents in layman's terms. Most people have read it at this point, but if you haven't, The Out of Sync Child is amazing. It really helps you understand this whole hypersensitivity, hyposensitivity, what the heck do I do next? She wrote another one then that was called The Out of Sync Child Has Fun. And those are all activities that you can do in order to promote, and they're written so that if your kid is hypersensitive in this area, these are activities that will help your child in those areas. If you're hypo here, these are activities that will help your child. Those are two really basic books that I couldn't write because they're frankly so good that they don't need to be rewritten. So they're ones I often recommend. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to end the recording real quick.
Sure.